Om Aganatimandasya Ganagana Sarakya Chaksurun Militam Yana Tashmahi Sugurve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yana Bhutare Swayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamanam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivishakan Vitam Sya Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Padanta Swami Taramane Namaste Sarasati Devi Gurvani Pacharine Nirvishesa Sanyvari Praskita Desana Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaur Bhakta Vindam Drama Piyada Vishuddha Vishuddham Vivo Semapirana Vidam Virapakyahi Dehomaram Sanklesha Nirvanam Usanyanyanyataham Krishna Swadam Upagate Dhamagini Karonashta Dishamasha Parona Rodunodidam Anartam Pashamam Chakshad Bhakti Yogamana Lokasajanato Chakra Satpada Samitam Atmaramastamuni Nagranti Kapi Orakanwe Korvanti Aiti Kupidam Itam Buddhagana Hari Hare Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram 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 Hari Hari. Wisdom Wednesday. Thank you all for joining us. Ram Kishore, Rakesh, Jean, appreciate your jumping in on the call. We had a power outage here in Spanish Fork. In fact, the temple is still, after about 15 hours, the temple's still without power. So all the produce that we have frozen in the freezers, all the cooked items, are thawing out gradually. We have several tours this morning, and they're scheduled to have lunch. So providing lunch will be more of a challenge without power. We'll see why it is that it's been so long. Usually when the power goes out, it's only an hour or so that it comes back on. It went out yesterday evening, early evening. It's still out when we woke up this morning. So Spanish Fork, Utah presents another one of its challenges. The verse that we're discussing, revisiting today, is the 19th verse, 5th chapter, 1st canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. This will be part 2. Navai Janu Jatu Kanta Janapajam Mukunda Sevya Anyavad Anga Samsitam Shmaran Mukundangi Upagana Punar Bihatami Chena Rasha Graho Janaha. My dear Vyasadeva, even though a devotee of Lord Krishna sometimes falls down some or other, he certainly does not undergo material existence like others, because a person who has once relished the taste of the lotus feet of the Lord can do nothing but remember that ecstasy again and again. That's our verse for today. Yesterday we mentioned these verses from the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Bhumyaraponaro kamano bodhira hankara itiram bina prakritam ashtadam apariyama tashtuanyam bina prakritam jiva bhutam yeheyam daryate jagat. The eightfold material energies of the Lord are earth, air, fire, water, ether. Those are the gross ones. And then the subtle ones are mind, intelligence, and false ego. Teyashtu sarvasangato jagatotur anihani mahare arubit. Says that we have like the outer coat, like an overcoat, which is the physical body of the 5 gross elements. Then we have the inner self, which is compared to the shirt, and that's made of the 3 gross material elements, mind, intelligence, false ego. And then within those 8 material elements, there is the spirit soul, which is eternal, part and parcel of the Lord. So the 8 gross material elements, both subtle and gross, are described as Bina Prakriti Ashtada. They are comprised of Krishna's material energy. We are comprised of Krishna's spiritual energy, and so therefore we're unchangeable, we're eternal, we're full of bliss and knowledge. But the material nature is inferior in as much as it's temporary and it's separated from Krishna's internal spiritual energy. But the key here is that when you engage the material energy in the service of the Lord, then that so-called material energy regains its original quality, which is that it's spirit. After all, even the material energy originates from the supreme spiritual Lord. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matas sarvam pravartite iti madhva bhajanti mam buddha bhava samamidham. Krishna says, I am the source of both the material and the spiritual world. And the wise who know this, they engage in my service with all their hearts. What's important about both the material and the spiritual energy is that they belong. They are the energies of the Lord, and they can be used in the service of the Lord. That's the vision of the Mahatmas, Bhajanti Ye Banasha. Those who know that there is nothing apart from the Lord. They don't limit themselves to the spiritual energy, but they also tax their brains to reclaim the material energy also for the Lord. Sita, the consort of Ram, is also in another incarnation manifestation, Durga, or the material energy. Ravan's business was to try to appropriate Ram's wife Sita away from Ram, her rightful, lawful Lord. Ravana wanted to enjoy the wife of Ram, who represents the material energy, separate from Ram, its creator and its owner. That's what was illegal about Ravan's very existence. Yepi anya devata bhakti yajanti shan tepi mama yajanti abidi purvakam. Any efforts to enjoy God's property separate and independent of the Lord are illegal. They're illicit, they're criminal, and they're going to call down upon your head all kinds of negative reactions. No one can doubt that's what happened to Ravana, who was laid down in the dust by Ram's arrows. But those aham sarvasya prabhavo, I am the prabha, I am the source of both the material and spiritual energy. Aham sarvasya prabha mata sarvam pravardite. Mata sarvam, from me everything comes. Iti mat bhajanti buddha bhava samambita. Those who have awakened spiritual intelligence exert themselves to reclaim, to retake ground for the kingdom of God, to bring Sita back to the side of Lord Rama, to reclaim her from the Ravans of the world. The Ravans of the world, Ishan Bogan Hibo Deva Dasanti Terdatan Apyavira Yo Bhukta Shtena Evacha. Third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita says, those who want to enjoy God's property separate from God are criminals. Imagine walking down the street, seeing a car there with the keys in the ignition. Now that car belongs to someone, they worked hard for it, they paid for it, or they're paying for it. They've got the title, they're authorized by the government to claim ownership of that car. But if you just see the car with the keys in it, the engine idling, and you think, oh, it's just here, it just happens to be here. You don't think it through or acknowledge somebody must own this car. And you just get in the car and drive it away thinking, yeah, it was just left here for losers, keepers, finders, whatever that little childhood ditty is. Then your name is going to go out, an all-point bulletin. The police are going to be looking for you. They're going to be searching for that license plate. And if they find you, they're going to pull you over with lights flashing, guns pulled, and haul you off to jail. And you can say, what did I do wrong? The car was just there. It was just up for grabs. When I was a kid, we used to grow up on Westerners. The black and white Westerners they would show in the movies there. And I remember there were Oklahoma, Kansas, when the first settlers arrived there, the land was up for grabs. They didn't acknowledge the Indians or the Native Americans. They just said the land is wherever claims it. So they would establish these land grabs. There would be the settlers on horses. There would be a starting line. And presumably they would have done their homework and plotted out the grids and known where they wanted to go beforehand as much as possible. And then someone would shoot the gun, and everyone would go off from the starting line in different directions and different distances, and they would try to beat everyone else to claim that particular piece of land that they had identified beforehand. And then they would take their claim, they would actually get a temporary ownership. Then to retain ownership, you had to work the land. You had to improve and cultivate the land. If you had a big plot of land, but you could only actually improve 50% of it, then you stood to lose the other 50%. But that's the way it used to be in America. America at one point, disregarding the Native Americans and their rights for thousands and thousands of years of prehabitation. You could justify, rationalize your taking over the land by saying, well, it was just there. I mean, no one owned it. It was just there for who anybody who wanted to take it. Similarly with the moon race, Russia and America were racing, see who would go to the moon, and the first one would get there would put their flag, stake their flag on the surface of the moon and claim the moon for their own. Nobody considered the moon's been there for thousands and thousands of years. Who created the moon? Who hung the moon in the sky? Who actually owns the moon? So the whole mentality of claiming land, dividing into states, counties, municipalities, nations, boundaries, the whole mentality is illicit, is not condoned by the Lord. Prabhupada was a universalist. He was a Mahatma. He has the broad vision. So as he traveled by plane, he would see vast tracts of land in Africa, Australia, uninhabited. He would say, give this land to the people who have nothing. Distribute God's property equally. Don't allow a certain vested section of the population to claim more than what is their natural quota, thus depriving others of the basic subsistence. Prabhupada saw Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. Krishna is the owner, the proprietor of everything. Whenever you talk about I and mine, my land, my family, my country, that is called abhidya borvakam. That is an illicit mentality. Those who have the higher intelligence, who are broad-minded, called Mahatmas, they don't see in terms of yours and mine. They only see that everything belongs to God. And every ounce of their energy is used to bring back God's property under the influence or under the sway of God. Sometimes I tell this story that before I encountered devotees, prior to 1970, I guess you would call me an anti-materialist. I had 2 pairs of jeans, a couple of t-shirts, a pair of shoes. I traveled all around the world. I accumulated no money. Had at most at any given time $150 in my pocket. When I needed to top up, I worked in the tomato fields in the Canary Islands. I tutored English in Paris and in Greece. I sold vitamin pills in Thailand. I worked the copper mines in Eilat and worked as a security guard elsewhere in Israel. And so I traveled all over the world, footloose and fancy free. Then finally I came to Australia in 1970. I met the devotees and I learned about God as the supreme Bhoktaram Yagatapasham, the rightful enjoyer of all of our efforts. Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, the creator and owner of all properties, and Suridam Sarvabhutanam, the best friend of all of his parts and parcels. As my mind became transformed by the purificatory processes of Krishna consciousness, taking the wonderful prasadam, which was cooked and offered by Upendra in those days, and hearing the beautiful and participating in the beautiful kirtans, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, gradually I transitioned into a mentality of being a servant, an instrument to fulfill God's will on earth. People say, our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's basically the difference between heaven and earth. In heaven, in the kingdom of God, God's will is done universally by everyone. But in this material world, hardly anyone does the will of God. It's all about I and mine. So becoming Krishna conscious means that you become one of the rare few living entities amongst thousands and thousands ones who actually decide to do the will of God, to live a God-centered life instead of a self-centered life. Manushanam sahashushu kasyad yatiti yatataram siddham kasyam mam veditaparaham. I think you'll agree with me that that mentality is rarer than hen's teeth in this material world. And yet it is the only path that is truly meaningful and truly purposeful and truly satisfying. So satisfied have I been over the years, and even increasingly satisfied that I have began the process of earning money, bringing money in to Krishna consciousness, spending the money joyfully, not even having for myself a bank account. I'm still the same guy who never had more than $150 in his pocket, but I try to have as much income coming into the Krishna temple account as possible, and then we try to spend that income in order to honor and glorify Krishna. Prabhupada said a Brahmin, Vaishnava, a devotee of Krishna, he may get $1 million in one day. The next day he spent all that money in the service of Krishna. So that guy who made it a principle not to have more than $150 in his pocket, because I'd seen how the accumulation of wealth pollutes one and pollutes the atmosphere. And so I was dead set against accumulating wealth. I'm still dead set against accumulating wealth. I don't have a dollar to my name. I don't have a personal bank account. But I am fully in. I am fully subscribed to the principle that everything should be owned and used in the service of the Lord. So we have a temple here in Spanish for yuta that cost. Now you may say this is material to do our list of assets and all. But I was present in Los Angeles. Prabhupada was sitting on the Vasasan as a part of his morning Bhagavatam class. He said, we have so many men. We have so many buildings. We have so many bands. We're spending so much money on produce every month. And this is our annual budget, $30,000 a month. He went right down the whole list. And the reason that he could do that was because not one penny was for himself. He was bragging on Krishna's opulence, Krishna's affluence. And he was also indicating that when you transition your life from a self-centered point of view to a God-centered point of view, then God's breath is blowing in your direction. Things that were previously difficult become easy. And so it is that just starting the process of chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare, becoming God-turned, you might say. So many assets came. The temple in Spanish Fork with 14 acres of land. The temple cost $1.2 million to build in 1998. You can only imagine how its value has increased, how the value of the land alone. There are a couple of other buildings that we purchased in recent years as domiciles for the devotees as well, and they sit on an additional 3 acres of land. In Salt Lake City, we purchased 4 acres of land, 33 blocks from the state capitol, downtown Salt Lake City. There were 13,000 square feet of building pre-existing on the land. We tore down a modular building which served as the previous occupants' library and computer lab. We built a beautiful temple. It took us 5 years to build it, from 2014 to 2019. Cost $2 million to build. We also purchased a little house across the parking lot. Funny, because when we bought the school in 2012 for $1.2 million, there was right across the parking lot, facing us, a building owned by a Japanese doctor, American-Japanese doctor, and his American wife. They had rented it out to their son and his friend. It was 1,000 square feet in the bottom and 1,000 square feet in the top, and it sat on like 0.2 acres of land. And it was very much in our complex. I knew that moving forward, we'd be very uncomfortable having non-devotees occupying this space. The son of the doctor was quite a nice fellow. His friend was nice. We got along with him fine, but we just didn't want someone looking out over us all the time and vice versa. So we arranged to pay a rent. I forget what the monthly rent was. And we put devotees in there. So we kind of had, we had the school, we had the temple we're building, we had the all kind of in a U shape, all facing inwards to the parking lot. There were other buildings, but they were kind of outside of the complex, you might say. So after a few years of renting, the owner's wife called me up and she said, "True, I need to give you a heads up. We don't want to hold on to the building anymore. We don't want to be income property owners. So I wanted to give you a heads up that we're going to advertise it for sale, and and I just wanted you to do the courtesy of letting you know that we're looking for a purchaser, and that you will have to vacate. You may have to vacate when we find a purchaser. And I'm thinking, I forget what her name was. Nice lady. Her husband was nice too, but she was calling me on the assumption that the impoverished, robed with funny marks on their forehead and shaved heads, ponytailed Hare Krishnas would never have the resources to buy their house. She just kind of wrote us off as prospective buyers and gave me a courtesy call to tell us, in effect, that they were going to advertise it to someone, with the means, assuming that we didn't have the means to buy the house. And I said to her, forget her name, Christine, I think her name was Christine. I said, Christine, did you ever consider us as purchasers? She says, well, no, that didn't occur to me. I said, well, why don't you let us make you an offer? And she said, well, what will you offer? And I knew what they had paid for it 5 or 6 years previously, so I added an amount, suitable amount to the purchase. I think I offered $165,000 for this 2,000 square foot property on 2.2 acres of land. And she says, how much time will you need to arrange the loan? And I said, we can probably buy it in a couple of days. There was this silence on the other end of the phone. She had totally underestimated Krishna. She, I guess, was now, perhaps for the first time, becoming dimly aware, aham sarvasya prabhu matasaram iti madhya, that Krishna is in fact the source of all material and spiritual worlds. Krishna is not a poor man, and Krishna smiles upon the efforts of his devotees to reclaim parts of his kingdom back in his service. So I think probably now, even several years later, Christine's still trying to get over the fact that the whole transaction was a cash transaction, and it took place. Of course, Paki is a real estate agent, and we used her, and we used an escrow company, but there was no need for an escrow longer than 2 or 3 days, and the whole transaction took place in 3 days. And that property, which we bought, I don't know, probably in 2013 for 165,000, would go for $500,000 easily now. And the temple itself it's interesting because the temple itself, what was the temple, was a school owned by the Seventh-day Adventists. They had built it in 1957 and run it as an elementary school. Very little meat, if any, was ever consumed on the property because I don't know if you're aware, but the Seventh-day Adventists are a vegetarian-based Christian sect. They believe that in order to be a good Christian, you should strictly follow that commandment which says, thou shalt not kill. They were very happy when we approached them about buying the property. I had been looking for something in Salt Lake City for a number of years. And there were either nice buildings, but with very little land and a lot of traffic right out the front door, which wasn't a very peaceful situation, or there was a good piece of building and a good piece of land, but Christians weren't too happy about the idea of selling it to the Hare Krishnas. I guess they have their own conception of what it means to reclaim land for the kingdom. Allowing the Hare Krishnas to sell it, by their definition, would be losing land for the kingdom. But the Seventh-day Adventists were a different cup of tea altogether. They were so happy. They welcomed us with open arms. They said, God sent you to buy this property. Interestingly enough, 4 acres downtown Salt Lake City. It had been on the market for a year already. The lady there said they had many inquiries, but no one was able to get the financing together. And we had a problem with the financing too, because like I said, I have no credit history. None of our members wanted to guarantee that amount because it was a big amount. We actually needed a $435,000 loan in order to be able to put a down payment on the property, and we needed someone to, the Seventh-day Adventists were happy with financing it themselves, but they needed a loan of close to $500,000. So anyway, we approached various banks, and they all turned us down as too risky. Um, we've always paid off our bills. We've always been debt free, but we don't have any predictable source of income. It's all just relying on the mercy of God, which I'll tell you is the best way to move forward economically, physically, and financially. There's no more. Uh, there's no more fruitful means of organizing yourself than just depend upon God from day to day. That's what all the animals, all the birds, all the bees, all the peacocks, they don't have bank balance, they don't have IRAs, they don't have Daisy Mays. Um, they just wake up every morning and they are confident God will provide them what they need for their sustenance. That is our modus operandus as well, and it stood us in good stead. But from a credit point of view, we don't have any credit. We never asked for it. We never needed it. So in order to secure this property, we needed to have a bank give us a loan and give us repayment terms. So finally, we were turned down by a dozen banks and a dozen institutions that specialize in church loans as being a bad risk. Finally, I went to Chase, which is where we've been banking for the last 30 years. And we finally got a call from a loan officer for Chase Bank from Texas. He was a South Indian. He started off his call by saying, the last Indian organization that we loaned money to for purchasing a temple, it didn't turn out too well. But he said, I like the Hare Krishnas. I go to your vegetarian restaurant, Kalachanji's in Dallas, so I'm going to take a chance on you. After being turned down as a bad credit risk from a dozen financial institutions and banks, Chase finally gave us a loan of $435,000. And then I think in the end they were a little disappointed with us because we paid it off. We paid off what we owed them, and we paid off the balance of the $1.2 million within 2 years. So they didn't get the interest rate that they would have normally gotten over a more prolonged loan period. But my point is, what is it? Chintamani Pokara Sadmashu Kalpavriksha Lakshabitu Sura Bhi Palyantam Lakshmi Sahasad Brahma Sevya Manam Govindam Adipurisham Tamahang Bhajami. The spiritual world is made of Chintamani, touchstone, which can transform any base metal into gold. The trees there are wish-fulfilling desire trees called kalpavrikshas. They'll give the devotee anything the devotee needs in order to do the service for the Lord. The devotee needs to pay off a loan. The kalpavriksha trees will give what they need to pay off the loan. If a devotee needs a house, which is in the compound, Krishna will give them means to purchase or acquire the house. The devotee needs to tear down an old modular building, which is an eyesore, and build a beautiful, gorgeous, jewel-like temple in downtown Salt Lake City. No problemo. Krishna, when you get in the middle of what Krishna wants done in this world, when you agree with the principle, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and your crooked places are made straight. People who wanted to do you harm turn around and want to do you good for a change. Krishna goes before you and pays the way. That has been my experience. So we can talk about dollars and cents and properties and assets and acquisitions, and it's not any of it material. Critics, naysayers, jaded cynics may say, well, true, you're supposed to be spiritual, and you just spent the last 15 minutes bragging about your assets. No, I didn't spend a second bragging about my assets. I spent the time bragging about Krishna has reclaimed his own property using us as his willing instruments. And I would heartily encourage those of you out here who are hearing this transmission to get into that same mind frame, because believe me, everything will go much easier. You'll get so much more pleasure and satisfaction out of reclaiming Krishna's property for himself than try to misappropriate Krishna's property in the name of your own aggrandizement. And I have to say also, as long as we're putting our cards on the table here, I won't mention any names, but I know devotees that have gotten inheritance from parents that have passed away first thing they've done is bought themselves a piece of land to build themselves a house. So they bought themselves a very expensive motorhome to go around and visit the temples. Well, not bragging again, but I'm just showing you the greater, immense, unlimited satisfaction that I get by turning over all of our assets to Krishna. When my mother passed away, I was surprised to get a call from the lawyer who told me that there were $220,000 worth of assets in her bank account. So I thought, how can I spend that 220,000? It was interesting because the temple in Spanish Fork had already been built and paid for. I was thinking, well, I could have used that 220,000 really, really hard up for money a year ago or 2 years ago. But at this point in time, the temple had been built, it had been paid for, everything was comfortable financially, and then whoa, just out of nowhere, uh, as a positive reaction to our having raised the money and built the temple, Krishna's saying, I'm just going to give you a little bonus here, and this money came into our lap. So at that time, we spent exactly that $220,000 on an octagonal pavilion, which we originally used as a performing arts center, uh, taking on the overflow of crowds from the temple on big occasions like Janmashtami and Diwali. In recent years, it's served more as a warehouse for our color sales, our wholesale color sales. And in recent years, also in the last year or so, birds have gotten in there. They've pecked little holes in the foam and made their nests and produced offspring, and they fly here and there, and they even get into some of the bags of colors and break the bags, trying to eat the cornstarch that's in there. So around May, I realized this is really a pesky problem, and I inquired about uh, relocating the birds. And everything I read indicated that the birds have their babies in their nests until the end of June. So you cannot do anything against any nest in Utah until the end of June. It's actually a law. It's actually a misdemeanor, in case you didn't know that. So I bided my time patiently. All the little birds are up and flying. So now we're going to go after those nests. We're going to pluck. We're going to repair the foam, holes of foam which have been chewed, and we're going to secure that because I don't want the legacy that my mother left, the $220,000 that my mother left. I feel that that's was earmarked for Krishna's purposes, and that octagonal building was what Krishna had in mind, and uh, and our little friends, the birds, have kind of deteriorated some parts of that, and so we're going to repair it and keep it in good shape. And this is uh, every time I look at that building, every time I do something to try to repair it or maintain it, I think of my mother, and I hope that this is um, fueling her wherever she is in the afterlife. So you tuned in today expecting a spiritual talk about the spiritual world, Goloka Vrindavan, and the Vaikuntha planets, and you pretty much got a, a profit and loss, income and disbursement rundown. Uh, this is Krishna Anashaktasha Visham Yataram Upajana. A devotee may appear to be dealing with finances in the same way that a non-devotee appears to be. Devotee may appear to be constructing buildings. There are so many buildings in Utah County. There's so much building going on at any given point in time, and we have done our share of building. We have been part of the economy in terms of building and creating structures and procuring land and repairing and renovating them. Right now, when the original contractor who poured the deck for the Spanish Fork Temple, which is behind me, he didn't do a very good job on the deck. He didn't put enough seams in the deck to allow for expansion and contraction. And so we just celebrated 20th anniversary, as you know. So over 20 years of freezing and thawing, cracks have developed in that deck. And most people who visit don't look down and criticize or fault find because there are occasional cracks in the deck, but they go willy-nilly and they're not attractive if you take a second look at it. So we've used some of the income from our recent Color Festival in Salt Lake City um, in order to contract a company which this very week is out there filling in all the cracks in the deck, and they're going to put an epoxy surface. They're going to resurface the deck with a nice sort of speckled cream earthy tone tile which has a little traction also to keep people from slipping.
It's going to be beautiful. I can't wait to take some pictures and share them with you on Facebook. They're working throughout this week and throughout the weekend to resurface this concrete deck, and I'm very excited. It's going to be wonderful. We get so many tourists, hundreds, if not thousands, of tourists coming in off the freeway, and we want them to have the very, very best experience possible. Krishna is no poor man. Krishna is the super excellent Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as servants, we need to keep Krishna temples, Krishna facilities, Krishna assets up to the highest standard. Again, I've been to Krishna temples where the paint's been peeling, where the windows aren't washed, where the grass isn't mowed. And I don't want to say anything to my God brothers, but I have to think, how do you call yourself a representative of Krishna when you cannot even get up on a ladder, scrape the paint, and repaint the eaves of the temple building? I won't say the city, but once I was visiting this temple, which was in a very exclusive area of the city. All the houses to the right and left and across the street were $1 million houses with trimmed hedges and manicured lawns. And here's the Hare Krishna temple in this exclusive area, run down. The grass isn't mowed. The weeds aren't weed trimmed, aren't weed whacked. The windows are peeling with paint, and I'm just thinking, what? What? But fortunately, counter blessings that here Krishna has not only allowed us to build two magnificent world-class buildings from scratch, but also we have the means to maintain them, keep them looking sharp and open for the public. And we can say, thanks to the grace of God, thanks to the goodness of God. It's not our credit. There's credit to us. It is only that we're willing to be instrument of Krishna. Prabhupada used to say, I was one man, I was one elderly Indian who came alone without any resources to America. Now we have so many temples, we have so many men, we have so many bands, and we have so much expenditures. He said, it is only due to the grace of God. It is not my doing, but because I was willing to represent Krishna, to deliver the message of Krishna consciousness, Krishna has showered with mercy. But as far as my qualifications, as far as my credit goes, I was only willing to be an instrument of Krishna. I'm not the doer. I'm not the one that caused all this to happen, but I was flexible and malleable enough to allow Krishna to use me in the way that he wanted. And when he arrived at Boston Harbor, one of the verses of Prabhupada's prayer was, I am your puppet now, you pull the strings as you want. Elsewhere, Prabhupada said, I'm just like the postman. The postman job is only to deliver the letter. Postman doesn't open up the letter, read it, strike some words out, add some words. He doesn't edit the letter. He just takes the letter from where it's sent and he delivers it faithfully and diligently at its destination. He doesn't open it, he doesn't change it. So Prabhupada said, if there's any credit that comes to me, he said, it is that I've simply delivered the message of Krishna. Many people used to say, Prabhupada, you've done miracles. You've done miracles. And this is an age when someone had hundreds of thousands of followers by producing a little bit of ash or a little bit of gold from his palm of his hand. And Prabhupada said, I don't do magic shows. I just present the orthodox message of Krishna consciousness as it was passed on from Narada Muni to Vyasadeva to his disciples and on down through the chain of disciplic succession. Each representative, each member, each link in that chain of disciplic succession has only passed on the message in its original spirit and with total fidelity, and has not interjected anything of their own wishes or druthers or preferences. They have simply passed down the message of Krishna faithfully, and that's how it reaches us today in this present age. And that's why we have an unending debt to the previous acharyas and spiritual master who have given us this mature, ripened fruit of Vedic knowledge. And we, in turn, have to be transparent via medias and passing it on to the future I'm running out of, I'm getting a preview of death when it said that at the time of death it will be very difficult to remember Krishna because your throat will be choked up with cough. So I guess it's a sign that we should wind up things here on this Wisdom Wednesday because True's getting choked up too much. But let me share some of the comments here with you all. Govinda Dev says, it's very interesting to hear these stories about constructing the temple facilities that are now the cherished houses of worship for Utah devotees, seats of devotional rapture. So you can take this information that I've shared with you today, all the nuts and bolts, and add it to the lore, the legend behind the Krishna and Salt Lake City temples. Legend meaning what Krishna has done, not what we have done. Very spiritual. William Griffith says it was very spiritual. Great. In case you had any doubts. Lakshmi Nishinga says the story about the development of Utah Krishna's faith in action. You know, I had notes from the Bhagavatam, but I just decided to share a little bit more of the the finances. It's not mundane. That's the whole point. As we said yesterday, the Mahabharata, Srimad Bhagavatam are full of kings and queens and conspiracies and betrayals and wars and love affairs. And normally we'd have, as devotees, nothing to do with all of that. But the difference is, Saraja Parashara Sevana Sokidota Varashagam Staram Shnignishu Pandashim Jigapranatim Bhaktim Karoti Nipatishtara. Because the Pandavas were bhaktas, wherever they went, Krishna went with them. Krishna lives in the heart of his devotees, and the devotee lives in the heart of Krishna. The devotees are as good as Krishna, and the devotees' stories are as good as Krishna's stories. Krishna reveals himself through his devotees, however unqualified they may be. The more unqualified the devotee is, such as myself and my Bobby, the more Krishna shows his goodness, shows his power by using us in order to do his work in the world. William Griffith says faith moves men and women and moves nations, and Krishna will use anyone. And here you're looking at the proof here. Bhakti Gary, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thanks for joining. Ram Kishore says, I believe there are still spots in the U.S. you can homestead. So there's still land rushes. There's still places where land rushes take place. That's an interesting bit of information. Thanks, Ram Kishore. Bear, thanks for joining us. Hare Krishna. Raleigh, Hare Krishna. Got some cooking to do, and we've got no power to do it. So interesting circumstances face us here on this Wisdom Wednesday morning. Jaya Sri Radhe. She came a little late, but she'll catch us later. She'll listen to this. Brent Spencer, thanks so much for joining us. Pranams. Again, Govinda Dev. Jean, thanks for joining us. Who else? Rakesh. Rakesh was practically the first one to jump on the call 45 minutes or so ago. Lakshmi, also, if you're out there, you're more than welcome to jump in at the end of any one of these calls, about 10 past the hour or so. Everybody still talks about your wonderful kirtans, which we're missing now. Pampadas, thank you for joining us. Okay, all right. Appreciate your being with us. This has been Wisdom Wednesday. We're going to go deal with a power issue and see how it is we can host 50 or 60 different tour people and give them lunch without any power on the premises. We'll learn something. Build a fire, William says. We may have to do that. Of course, the stoves are gas powered, so that part of it is okay. But how are we going to heat the water in the steam table and keep the salad bar cold? Those are answers to questions that Krishna has right now. I don't have them. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for being part of the wonderful journey of Krishna consciousness, taking advantage of this unique and valuable opportunity of the human form of life. Count your blessings and chant the names of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram.